So I've been a trustee of the Shrub Cooperative. I'm glad to see Joe Elston, one of the staffers from the co-op. I first met Phyllis Martin when we, as a cooperative, put out an inquiry for assistance with fundraising, because after having two very successful grants from Climate Challenge Fund and from Zero Waste Towns, we were facing a cliff, like many community-led organizations. And so Phyllis and her team in TrufflePig were successful in getting that. And it's that relationship which means that I'm confident that as a keynote speaker, as somebody to get us going, get the juices going on fundraising, Phyllis will be the right person to give us some tips and hints. So I'm going to pass over to Phyllis now. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you for the introduction, David, and thank you to everyone for making time to come and think about fundraising. It's one of the things that ends up at the bottom of the to-do list. We'll get around to it later. It'll happen tomorrow. I'm too busy. So it's really good to make the time to think about it and to get those cogs turning. It's something that there's never enough money and there's never enough time. So I've been working in fundraising for 20 something years now. I know I look about 12, but it's not true. And I've worked mostly with small organizations, with small charities. That's where I started out bringing in money. And so what I wanted to kind of share with everyone today in this first section is just a little bit about what I've learned in that time. I know that everybody is juggling a lot of roles, is often wearing several hats, and particularly in these kind of community-led organizations, there's not a huge amount of resources. And so what I'd like to do, and what I've done with Shrub, is kind of work with the team to figure out what knowledge is there and how to approach fundraising in a way that recognizes that fact, that recognizes that you're not sitting there on a nice salary, you've not necessarily got you have a full time in the week to dedicate to it. So for this first section, I'm going to talk about those kind of building blocks of good fundraising. Then we're going to have a bit of time for questions, and then I'm going to take you through my kind of COVID impacts on fundraising and a little bit of how to deal with those before you go into your breakout rooms. And so when I start to work with any kind of organization, I've worked with maybe 70 different organizations over the last 5 or 6 years, and I'm brought in to do fundraising. And the thing that makes me the happiest is when that organization has answers to the main question. And that main question is, what are we raising money for? And it's one of these things that sounds really obvious, but if someone can't tell me what we're raising money for, then I can't go and raise the money. And if you're the person that's writing the forms or running the events, it's the same thing. It's the same question you need to be asking, and to have a clear picture of what it is that you need the money. This gets unpacked. So it's not only what are we raising the money for, but when are we raising the money for? And when do we need this money to be sitting in the account? And also, when are the things going to happen that once we have the money, what are we going to deliver? What month is it going to happen in? What week is it going to happen in? And we also need to know who we're raising the money for. And this is about the people who benefit from your work. And obviously there's all kinds of size of organizations here. So some of you might be working really focused on refugee communities. Some of you might be really focused on children and young people. And we really need to have that clear picture of who is going to benefit, and whether that's from a workshop or a community garden or a renewable power project, there's an end person. And anyone who's giving you money, whether that's a grant fundraiser, a grant funder, a sponsor, or someone who's just putting some money in a collection tin in your shop, that's who they care about, is that end person. And ideally, you're being a community-led organization, you've got those people involved, you know who they are. Even if you don't, you will have them in mind, and being able to paint a clear picture for anyone who's giving you money of who those people are, and is a really important building block for any kind of fundraising that you're doing. So we've thought about what, we've thought about when, we've thought about who, and probably the most important thing is the why. And so anyone that's taken the grant writing toolkit with me will be familiar with the arrow. And I talk about the arrow having 3 parts. The point of the arrow is the why, is the vision. The shaft of the arrow is the logistics and the feathers are the supporters. And you can have amazing logistics and amazing supporters, but if you don't have that why, if you don't have that vision and that passion and that reason for doing it, then you fire that arrow at a target and it's just going to bounce off. So understanding why you're doing it is really important. And you can get bogged down in a lot of let's write a mission statement workshop, but really what it means is that you're passionate about what you do and you've got something you're trying to move towards. And particularly with climate change and the climate emergency and the nurturing that we need to do with our environment, it's a huge problem. And it's not going to be, you're not going to be able to solve all of it. So focusing in on what is in front of you, who are the people that you have access to, what are the skills and the knowledge and resources that you have, and what can you change in your community? And being able to express with enthusiasm and passion that vision and is going to draw people in to your project. So it sounds like quite big picture stuff, and it is important to have that big picture before you get down into the detail. So what I find with a lot of organizations that I've worked with, and I'm sure it would be true if I had the time, which I would love to have to go and chat to all of you about specifically what you're doing, is that the project idea itself is just bones. And the bones of the project might be good, but they need to be fleshed out properly. And for all kinds of fundraising, there's the iceberg principle applies. 80% of the iceberg is under the water, 20% is above. And that 80% that's underneath is the planning for your project, is thinking through your project development and understanding the details of those questions. When is it going to happen? Who is it going to happen for? How is it going to happen? And so what can end up tiring people out in a way is coming up with new projects for every funding opportunity. And what I really want to encourage everyone to do is kind of take a step back from that and think about the projects first. So have a little image of a horse and carriage with the driver. And a lot of people feel like the funders are the horse, and therefore they're going to decide where you're going. You look at a fund and you're like, they've got money for that, let's do that. And you really need to put yourself in the position of the person holding the reins and deciding and knowing what your projects are, knowing what you want to achieve, so that you're not running off and chasing something shiny and coming up with a new project, doing all of this work to develop a project idea and only submitting one application. So taking the time to reflect on what it is that you want to achieve and why you want to achieve it is going to help you have that sense of mission and that sense of understanding of what it is we're raising money for. And then you go out and you find the funds that help you do that. And doing it that way round saves a lot of energy. It saves a lot of time. I saw there was someone there in the chat saying they were looking for a funding strategy. And strategy is a really grand word. I like being like, oh, I can deliver you a funding strategy. That sounds like something expensive and professional. But really all it means is that you're making a choice. You're not reacting to the situation. You're not going, oh God, there's a fund. Right, let's do a thing. You're making choices and you're thinking and you're responding. It's not that knee jerk, there's money, I've got to have the money because I've got no money. And it's knowing who you are, knowing who you're serving, knowing what you want to achieve, and then going out there and finding the right fit and the right match for what you're up to and what you want to bring into fruition in the world. So funds are the horse and the project is the carriage, but be the driver, be in the driving seat and hold the reins. And then when you're making active choices, you're going to be doing better fundraising. So what I would say are the key principles of grant writing are tenacity, are keeping going, and not getting disheartened. Like the emotional management is a big part of my job. It's really disappointing not to get funding, but you've got to keep going and understand there's going to be a lot of no's before you get to a yes. You need to do your planning. You need to have this 80% of the iceberg underneath the water fully realized and fully fleshed out, so that you're taking really strong ideas to funders when you do go. And in order to do those things, particularly as part of a community-led organization, you need communication. It's so much stronger when we can have those planning sessions and those discussions together as a team. And I had a chance to do a lot of that with Shrub, which was fantastic, and has laid the groundwork now for a process the whole team understands. Even if they're not the one doing it, they're not at the coalface writing the forms and filing the reports. If they understand what it is, the work that you're doing, then where they fit into it, they're going to take part in that more enthusiastically. And you're going to end up with a workload of fundraising that's manageable for you. And so, yeah, tenacity, planning and communication are the things that I encourage you to do for all of your fundraising, even if you're just getting started. And applying those principles will help you stay sane and happy and, in the end, well-resourced for your projects. We've got a wee bit of time now where we can throw things open to some questions. So we'd had a question from Megan about sustainable fundraising, and I asked whether she meant sustainable in terms of where it comes from or sustainable in terms of the organization itself. And in this particular instance, she's talking about where the organization, how the organization itself manages it, because fundraising can be one of these things. It feels like you're never on top of it. It's quite draining. It's quite exhausting. Now, I'm going to say the reality is that most organizations run on annual grants. So that's a grant that's 12 months long. Once it's finished, you've got to report on it and you've got to bring in another annual grant. That's the reality of it. There are multi-year grants out there and you should absolutely go for them. And they're going to form a good, strong basis if you can pull in something like the old climate challenge funding or lottery funding, or some of the councils have multi-year grant programs, but they're never going to be all of it. Even if you do manage to get one of those in, there's always going to be this annual grant cycle that you're going through. So the way to make that sustainable for you is to identify, and I'm going to talk about a bit more about this in the next section, is to identify the funders that are the right funders for you. It's about having a list of funders and a database and knowing when they're open through the year so that you can work your way through it in a kind of a measured way and go, right, these are the applications I'm writing in January, these are the ones in February, these are the ones in March, and making them really targeted. So people who are most likely to fund you. And like I said, I will talk a bit more about that in a wee bit. And that sustainability is about writing several applications about the one project. So if you've thought it through properly, you've got your timeline for it, so you know when it's going to happen, you've got your budget well worked up, you know what your outcomes are, you know who you're working with. It's a lot easier to rewrite that application 5 times about the same thing than it is to write one and then go start thinking about something completely different. So if you're finding that you're struggling to kind of sustain the motivation and the resources in your organization, then clustering your applications together and rewriting them, spending time getting the quality good, and then rewrite and get it out the door loads and loads and loads is a way to hit the volume of applications you need without feeling like you're burning out. And it also means that you can spread the load. So again, the work they've done with Shrub, there's a subcommittee that meets every 2 weeks that looks at fundraising, and we look at the list of, here's the grants we're working on this month. So-and-so is going to draft that one, so-and-so is going to draft that one, so-and-so is going to draft that one. And they're all working off the same copy and the same plan that's been really well fleshed out. And then you can spread that workload and you can delegate, and you can get people who don't necessarily have loads of funding expertise to rewrite a form into a new format, and then that's another one ready to go out the door. So it's the working, I hate the phrase, it's like working smart, not hard. But yeah, that's the way to keep it sustainable. Look for multi-year grants when you can and manage your process of where you're applying to. Hopefully that gives a bit of insight there. Alison saying how much it costs to have someone like you come in and help with fundraising like I did for Shrub. It's a fair point. It does depend a bit on where you're at and how ready you are and how much work is going to be done in-house and how much is going to be done by the outside support person. I would say that the TrufflePig kind of contracts range from about £2,000 to, it can be up to about £10,000 for a year, and kind of anywhere in between. But there's also there's ways of making it work. So you can get some help that's about editing up one application, then you go away and write all the different copies of it. If you've only got a few £100, I would spend that on getting a database put together of funders for you, or helping to put that work plan and say, go for them in this order and ask for this much. But there's also a course that I'm doing starting in January, which costs £570 plus VAT, which is modules on how to do each of those things yourself: build your database, make your timeline, do your budgeting. And so we might have some discounted places available for that as well. And so that's some rough figures for you, just to kind of give you a bit of information and insight if that's something that's useful for your organization. So Mika is asking about focusing on the project and showing passion. And when writing, is it more important to illustrate how well it fits the brief, or to focus on expressing the why of the project, even if it isn't a perfect fit for the grant? Okay, well, I would say you've got to figure out how it's a fit for the grant. And this is one of the things I'm going to talk about, is that there's not usually a pot of money with your project's name on it that's specifically for what it is you want to do. So you have to take a kind of, what are all the ways in which my project can do different things for different people? I've done a lot of fundraising with circus. There's no funding for circus, but there's funding for dance, and there's funding for theatre, and there's funding for youth work. And I've got all of those things to fund a circus project. So for a climate, community climate project, maybe there isn't funding for a community climate fund, but maybe there's funding for youth work, and you're doing, community work with young people. Look at the beneficiaries and who you're helping and who wants to fund work with them. Is it elderly people? Is it isolated people? Is it people in areas of urban deprivation? Is it elderly people? Is it families? And anyone who wants to fund those people to have a better life, they don't mind if you're using climate-led community activity is the tool to do that. They care about the change that happens to the person. So don't sort of go, I'm looking for climate money. Look everywhere. And what I do is, anytime a fund comes out, I go, how can I explain to them that the way that the activity that I'm doing meets that? So make it a fit. Look for the fit, look for what you're delivering, look for those areas. And if you're looking and it really isn't a fit, go find stuff that's a better fit. And make good use of your time by picking the right funders. So sometimes having a fundraising strategy means making the choice to not apply for something because it's not right. And fundingscotland.com is the resource that I use the most for finding funds. They've got really good databases that you can search. It's free for individuals. So I would put some time into the research and find the good fit. And you do need to fit the brief, you do need to fit the criteria, but you can take a wide view of how you do that. And I'd encourage everyone to be looking at multiple perspectives on your work. And really what you want to go and do is look at what are the outcomes the funder says they want to see. Because quite often he's like, oh, we want to see a better life for people. And you can go, right, well, this is how the work that we're doing produces a better life for them. Or there might be young people going into work, or we want to see a reduction in poverty. And any kind of climate-based project is going to be improving quality of life. It's going to be improving sustainability. It's going to be connecting people and in new ways and reducing isolation and meeting all of these outcomes that funders have. You've just got to spell it out for them, the ways in which it's going to do that. I'd say, again, we've got a huge sort of range of different levels of experience here. So this won't be news to everyone, but I'd say you definitely want to be looking at lottery funding, particularly their Awards for All programme, which is under £10,000. Anyone can apply. You can apply if you're not a charity. It's a relatively straightforward form, but you do need to be working with or benefiting a deprived or disadvantaged community in some way. Even if that's not what you were doing, but there's partners that you're going to work with in those areas, like see if there's something within your program that fits, because an Awards for All lottery grant is a relatively straightforward one to get. You should also absolutely be looking for council money of some kind, because councils are also one of the organisations that will fund non-charities. And if you're a KIC or a constituted group or an unconstituted group, root it out. They're not brilliant about telling people about their funds. Yes, there's also a recommendation of Lush. Lush will fund all kinds of structures. So Ruby's asking, are funding organisations the only ones to target? Are there other types of funders? Yes, absolutely. So for a large organisation, we'd be looking at there being different streams of funding, and it gets called trusts and foundations. Is your lots of small trusts and foundations, but that's essentially your writing application form. So we'll kind of include the lottery, the council, the government in that process, because you fill out a form, you send it away, you wait for 4 months and they give you an answer. But there's also, everyone can be looking at sponsorship. It's tricky because the companies that have got all the spare money are the ones that are screwing the planet over. So you don't want to be taking their money. But you can if you can find the right business and make the right approach, there's potential there for a sponsorship organisation. There's crowdfunding. I ran a session on crowdfunding this morning, and a crowdfunding campaign, I think, can reasonably bring in a few £1,000s for any organisation. As long as you make it an urgent ask, you make it something specific that people can really easily understand what's going on, run that. It's still quite a bit of work, but it's a way to engage people and raise awareness. It's like a publicity campaign and a fundraising campaign. Then you can look at what's called major donors, which is it's a longer burn and it's a more specialist area, and I wouldn't really recommend it for small organizations, but it's where you try and get in touch with people who have a lot of money who might be wanting to make a donation. Now, the recommendation I would make for all of you guys is the Network for Social Change. So Network for Social Change is it's where the left-wing people with money are. It's the people who've made loads of cash and they want to give it away, but they want to give it away to things that aren't going to make a mess of the planet and make a mess of society. So there is a notice board where you can put a bit of information about your project. That's a good one to look at because they meet in February and they give their grants in February. So you put something on the notice board and you might be matched then with a philanthropist. So that's where, from a major donor point of view, I would look at it. FundingScotland.com, the service that they do, it's the old SCVO funder database, is a great place to look. And it's also really worthwhile if you've got a network like this and you've got a forum like this for everyone to kind of put the names of who funds them or funders that they know of into a central document and share that. So have a look at that funder list, and if you see one, if you know that there's ones that you've got support from that aren't on that list, add it in, because that kind of big list of funders, big database is a really key resource for everyone to have, and then work your way through and find the right ones for you, find the really good fits, and don't go chasing too many almost fits. Yeah, save your energy for the good stuff. Okay, so any website guidance for funding application structure? Not really. I mean, I can share some applications that I've written that have been anonymized, but generally the application form gives you the structure. And there's always kind of headings. So I can share an application that tends to cover most of the headings. In fact, the good one for that, we'll pop it in here, is the Tudor Trust. So the Tudor Trust will fund non-charities, and they allow you to create a proposal, not a form, and they just tell you, here are the headings. So I would go to the Tudor Trust, look at their guidelines, work on that, and then by the time you've got a Tudor Trust proposal, you can rework that into a lot of different application forms. What's COVID done? Spoilers, none of it's good, but the strengths of fundraising and the good processes of fundraising hold true still. COVID era T&F fundraising, so that's trusts and foundations. So this is our application form based fundraising. And so this is what I've been doing for a long time. So I founded TrufflePig, who work with small organizations, and I'm also an associate with BTA, who work with larger organizations. And I've worked with a whole range of small and medium charities with kicks for constituted groups to do a whole bunch of different things. So I write applications, I've written thousands of them, I think, by this point. I've created strategies, I've mentored staff teams and given advice on what to apply for. And I'm based in Glasgow, but I work kind of across the UK. And so this advice is based on continuing to fundraise right the way through the pandemic, seeing the patterns and the changes from what I was used to and what was still working, given the situation. So the key impacts of COVID have been shorter application windows. So it used to be that funds would be open for maybe a month, maybe for 3 months at a time. And what we're seeing is that funds are open for much shorter periods. Now, at the peak, this was things only being open for 3 days, and sometimes only half an hour. And now it's getting a little bit easier to breathe, but you're not going to have a huge amount of time where the application portal is open or people are actually taking in applications. This is one that I was like, oh, maybe I'll be able to take it off the presentation, but Omicron is bringing this back into the mix, is that there's unpredictable distancing and lockdown levels. So you're trying to raise money for things and you don't know what version of them you're going to be able to deliver because you don't know what the parameters are going to be. There is an increased focus, though it was always there, on poverty and the impacts of poverty, on employability, like people being able to get into the workplace, particularly young people, and mental health and well-being. So there's funds that used to be looking at other areas that were maybe more arts focused or maybe more youth work focused, and now there's an understanding that this is really where we need to be putting money. And there is a vastly increased competition for funds. absolutely insane and off the scale. This is again easing now, because it was organizations that, you know, they got money from their charity shops, they get money from their gala dinners, they got money from people doing a marathon, they got money from people doing coffee mornings, and there's been a big chunk of time when none of that could happen. So they were turning around to the funders who were supporting everything else and going, we need money, and we need hundreds of thousands, and we need millions to replace, to keep us going. So they are starting to come out of those funding pools again, and there's not quite so many fish in the pond as there used to be. But this is the situation that we're up against. And just to make a reference, of course, to COP. So COP itself brought sustainability and environmental damage and the climate emergency up to the top of the agenda in terms of press, in terms of awareness. Now, as I'm sure you'll all know, it hasn't necessarily changed all that much. And that focus and the intensity of that focus, because we were hosting it in the UK this year, is unusual and will wane. However, funders are looking for positive climate action, and that this is funders across the board. Everybody's been thinking about it, everyone's aware of it. So the things that impact that has is finding ways to build that into your fundraising. So one of the recommended ways is to refer to the UN sustainability goals in your applications, because those are good. And we'll talk a wee bit about signposting and how important it is that when you're making your case for why something matters, you are referring to sources of information outside of yourself rather than you just making the case. So being able to say the UN sustainability goals are these, and our project is moving towards this, and name the specific sustainability goal. So that's one thing that you can start adding in. That's a good reference point. You might all be doing this already, and I'm preaching to the choir, but if you haven't considered it, use them as a reference point. You want to make sure you're collecting data on your impact and statistical data if possible. So Shrub again have got good figures on this. And in terms of this many tons of carbon saved, but even, you know, this many tons of food saved, and this many tons of clothing, this many items, this many people supported, and being able to give the statistics for that, for your impact of your projects, is going to be really useful. And this is the point that I made earlier, that you can look much wider than just environmental funding, because if you approach youth work funds or deprived communities funds or even arts funds, your positive climate contribution will make you stand out, because all of those funders are now also looking for and having to ask about and include that in their decision making. Is this a project that is going to help with the climate emergency, or is it something that is going to hinder it? So the fact that that's now a theme that everyone is looking at strengthens your projects and makes them more fundable. So I would use COP as the springboard. Try not to get too depressed about the results of it, and just use it as a springboard for getting attention and resources for your projects. So short application windows, these things where there's a really short period of time, means you need to have your ideas ready. So when I was talking about that 80% of the iceberg is the project plan is underneath the water, you need your fully developed project plan before the application window opens. And the key building blocks of this are a timeline as to when the different parts of your project are going to happen, a budget that shows what you're looking for and shows what you already have in terms of resources, in-kind funding, match funding. You need a couple of really clear, well thought out outcomes, which is just the changes that happen for the people. So you're picturing the end user, how's their life different? What does it do for them? And you need your logistics to be strong. And this is a kind of how is it going to happen? When is it going to happen? Who is it going to happen for? So having those ideas ready to go and not waiting for the fund to open to get the plan developed up is going to help you with that, because when it opens, you're just copying and pasting and bashing everything down on the bit of paper and hitting send. To do that, project development meetings are a really good thing to instigate in your group, and these don't have to be endless. This can be an hour, a month, you know, but you get everyone in a room and you talk about your new ideas and how do you move them along. So you look at each of your, have we got a timeline for this idea? Has someone sat down and thought about what month are we going to start the community garden? What month are we going to start doing a food collection project? How far are we away from being able to start a remakery or a tool library? Whatever the idea is that you have, get it down onto a calendar. get it down to a proper budget of how much of each of these things going to cost. Because until you have those building blocks of timeline, budget, outcomes, and logistics, you're not ready to write an application. And these regular meetings and discussions where people go, okay, we're going to talk about the tool library. We're going to sit together for an hour and get it down on paper what we actually mean. And then we're going to have it ready to write applications. And that's going to really help. And although this is one of the biggest asks, you need to plan in time for reactive working. So this basically means gaps in your diary. If you filled every hour of every day with tasks and the fund comes up where suddenly it's open and suddenly that opportunity is there, you don't have the capacity to pull that in. And so it's for being honest about your capacity and your time and trying to like crowbar out a few hours a week even, or a few hours a month where you're going to take the opportunities and you're going to work on things. So uncertain lockdown and distancing. This was much more of a consideration during the kind of the long, hard lockdowns, but it's still worth doing because we don't know what we're facing in the coming year. And this is to have parallel programs and dual purpose budget lines. So this just means that you plan your in-person version in a room, and generally, there's going to be some people that you're paying, and there's going to be some space that you're hiring and using, and there's going to be some costs associated. And the people are still going to do it, regardless of whether it's in person or online. And then you start swapping budget lines. So if you say, oh, it would cost us £15 an hour to hire this venue, if you're doing an online version, you take that money and you use it to pay a video editor. Or if there's travel, you use it to pay for recording equipment. Or if there's fees for people to come and do something, you turn that into your budget for a podcast. So it's just to have your online version and your offline version kind of sketched out and be able essentially to reassure funders that there's an online version that you would try to do if you're in a situation where you're in a lockdown. Now, if your projects are such that you can't do an online version because it's physically building something in a space, then you would do a parallel timeline for it and say, okay, this would be our ideal time, but if we can't manage it in this, we would redo it in the autumn. We would wait for those restrictions to lift and then we would relaunch. And it is absolutely a pain in the ass to do this and have to fully design out 2 different things. But when funders are looking at 100 applications and they can only pick 10, they're going to take stuff off the table that doesn't have that belt and braces planning in there. So in terms of poverty, employability, and mental health, so these are the kind of the big themes, and chances are a lot of what you're doing does already meet these themes. But if it doesn't, or you can't clearly articulate how it meets these themes, then the thing that you need to do is not necessarily change what you're doing. It's to look at your evaluation, because if you can get good evaluation methodologies to show these impacts, then you can say, this is how my project helps alleviate poverty, or this is how my project helps benefit mental health. And evaluation just means the data that you're collecting on the people who are taking part and the questions that you're asking them. So the reference points for me are the Richter scale, who design questionnaires to look at outcomes, and they're really good for soft outcomes, so like well-being and mental health, and these are quite sort of fluffy concepts sometimes. And if you go and look at the Richter scale, you can download their question sheets. They sell little they sell kind of pads with sliders on that you can use, but you can also access the questions for free. So using those questions and picking ones that you're happy to ask people about their well-being, about their confidence, about their social isolation, about what they've learned. You can also look at, particularly if you're working with young people, Shinari indicators. I can't remember what Shinari stands for, but essentially it's a government indicators. So it's things that you can measure, and again, questions that you can ask people, particularly young people, that will help you evaluate whether you've had an impact on mental health or you've had an impact on poverty, on their circumstances. The other things you can do is work in partnership with specialist referral partners. So this is organizations who can send a person to you to take part in your tree planting, in your building project, and they hold information about those challenges in that person's life. So if you don't feel like what you want to be going and kind of asking people questions and kind of getting into their business and getting into their life, then if you've worked with a partner who supports young carers or supports low-income families, then they can share that data with you, and they can evaluate and say, actually taking part in your project has had a big impact for these people because we see it in other areas where we're working with them. So that's a real strength, and funders love partnership working. The other thing is to work with specialist delivery partners. So if you're really wanting to address mental health but you don't have those skills, find an organization that does, and maybe have them come along and train your staff, or have them come along and deliver mental health support as part of the service that you're putting in. And again, funders like to see that. So you can say, this is money, we need money for us, and we also need money for our partners so that they can deliver this employability advice, or this mental health advice, or this financial planning advice. So you can kind of build your skills in that area and build it into your applications, and then start delivering that when you're successful. And the last one is this increased competition. And aside from what I said earlier about picking the right ones and having a measured work plan so that you're not running around in a panic, increased competition is about having the strongest application on the table. There's no shortage of good ideas. There's not even a shortage of great ideas. But what people tend to miss out, and where something, you look at a project and go, but we're just like them, why did they get money and we didn't? Chances are their evidence was stronger. And evidence was already of growing importance pre-COVID, but it's separating the wheat from the chaff. So the lottery specifically are asking for more evidence that you've spoken to people about your idea, evidence of need. The councils are, and trusts are starting to. So detailed evidence of need really means you've had conversations with people and they've said, we want more of this, or we want you to start this. That kind of consultation, chats to people, surveys, events where you've spoken to people. And where the lottery goes, other funders follow. So the lottery is starting to require specific questions around this evidence. Yep, so have a look at what the lottery is asking, and if you can answer those questions, that's going to be stronger. And the latest Institute of Fundraising conference, where lots of people like me get together and talk to each other, suggests that evidence of impact is going to be the great divider in successful applications and not successful applications in the future. I am going to skip through this because we're short of time, but you are going to get it as a supporting document. So this is evidence suggestions and things that you can do, evidence of impact. And the thing I am going to say though is evaluation is really important. Evaluation is tedious and no one likes doing it, and everyone's like, oh God, I have to fill in a survey, but it's your ammunition for strong applications. So spend as much time and focus planning, designing and delivering your evaluation as you do planning the project, because it's what you then write down to say, here is why I know it's needed. Here is why I know we can do it. Here is the evidence of the impact. So it's outcomes, evidence of need and impact for your funding bids. Okay. There's a few details there about other support that can be offered. So TrufflePig has a free Facebook group for deadline reminders that you can join. There's some contact details for the grant writing toolkit course that's starting in January. And I've also got some slots in the new year for mentoring for organizations and for advice. So that will all be on the slides that will come through after this for your reference as well. There we go, whistle stop tour, 4 minutes over. It's always easy to get caught up in the kind of in the big picture, in the whole landscape of it. And what I would recommend anyone does to kind of start a process of trying to improve their fundraising is to identify one project that you know loads about and you know that you want to run, ideally something you've run before, and just focus on that. Focus on what is that project, and try and find yourself 5 funds that are a good fit for that project, and work on that and get 5 applications out the door for that one thing. And that's going to get you into that rhythm, because you can't think about everything all the time. So do one project, 5 applications, then pick a second project, 5 applications, third project, 5 applications, and build those things that you need as you go. Build your evidence as you go, build your skills as you go, and just keep getting things out the door. It doesn't have to be perfect. Progress is better than perfection, and submitted applications are better than unsubmitted ones. So I've got a couple of things to add there, but also different things that people have been saying. in their groups. Yeah, finding the right funders is always the sort of the trickiest bit. So my hot tip for where to find funders that are relevant for you is to go and look at the websites and published accounts of organizations that are similar to you. A charity's accounts are transparent, like they are in the public domain, so it's fine for you to go and look at them, and quite often they will list specifically all the grants that they've been given and the amounts, and that's if you've only got a short amount of time to figure something out about where to go to, that's going to return the most kind of bang for buck for your time, is going and seeing who has funded a similar organization and then going and researching those grant programs and can you apply to them. I've also got another couple of ones that are open right now, or I know will be open again soon, that everybody should be considering. So there's the Bank of Scotland Reach Fund. There's a link in the chat there. The thing I love about the Bank of Scotland Reach Fund is the application form is a single page of A4. That's it. There's like a couple of 50-word descriptions and a tiny breakdown of your costs and a 1 page of information. So your challenge there is getting it into 1 page rather than having to generate screeds and screeds of stuff, but they're really good. And they will only fund charities, but if you are a charity, it's absolutely worth looking for. The People's Postcode Trust is another, which at the moment is running monthly rounds, but they will only take 100 applications, so you have to have it kind of ready and then go in and be like submit. It was only open for half an hour the first time, but now it's lasting about 2 days before it closes. But they will fund not charities, it's just a smaller grant, so you can go for like up to 20 grand for a big grant, or £2,000 for a small one if you're not a charity. And the other one that people don't seem to know about so much, though handily their website isn't working right now, is the Chance 2 funds. So this is the Scottish Children's Lottery, so it is focusing on young people. If you're not engaging young people or families at all, it's not going to work for you. But if you are, then there's different themes. Oh, they're all down. Well, that's rubbish. Someone's obviously forgotten to pay their hosting fees. But Chance to Flourish, Chance to Connect, Chance to Study are all sort of different themes of working with young people, and their funds tend to be undersubscribed, which is not a thing that ever happens anywhere else. So check them out if you're doing any work with young people. So those are some more relatively easy ones to go for. So other challenges that people were talking about is not necessarily having the time or the skills for the admin, because they want to do the delivery and you've got time and skills for that, and that's a really common problem in small organizations. But the thing to do with that is to build in to your funding applications evaluation, project management and administration, and put that into the budget, because the funders are for the most part expecting to see that. Some of them will say that those aren't budget lines we're going to fund, but some of them will, and you can include that time at, I would generally say, between like £90 a day up to like £150 a day, and either pay for yourself to do that time during the project, or even better, pay someone else to do it and then you don't have to. But build those things into your applications, and that's how you'll kind of get the resource to be able to handle that stuff alongside the delivery that you're trying to do. The other thing is people talking about community consultation and evidence of need. If you don't have it, or you don't feel like it's strong, one thing that's worked a couple of times for me is to go apply for awards for all from the lottery for money to run the consultation. And this is a blinder. So you're not going to be getting the full £10,000. You're probably only getting a couple of grand, but you can apply for your time to design a consultation, a venue, you can pay for some food, you can pay for your marketing materials to invite people along to a focus group, to an event, you can apply for money to pay someone to call all of your participants and speak to them. You can pay for a photographer to come and gather evidence. You could pay for a videographer to gather evidence. But I've just got £4 grand for a client out of Awards for All, because we went to one of the bigger lottery funds and they went, you've not got enough evidence of community consultation to apply. And I said, great, what do you want us to have done? And they were like, we want you've talked to young people and got them in a room together and asked them. And I was like, great, well, we need money for that. So they'd sent us to Awards for All and we brought that in. So it's a way of getting that process going. And you can also use Awards for All to maybe run a pilot. And that pilot is going to help you get that evidence, because you run something that's maybe a shorter version or a smaller version of what you want to do. Then you gather all the evaluation, you take the pictures and you go back to the funder and go, now we want to do the big version, and here's our evidence. Here's the people saying it's amazing. Here's the pictures. Here's the stuff. So that's one way to kind of pull yourself up by the bootstraps around that and access the bigger funds. And there was crowdfunding got mentioned a couple of times, and yeah, I had to go away and upload my considering crowdfunding webinar that I delivered this morning, and that is available. The recording of that will be available from BTA for 25 quid if you want to get access to that and accompanying slides from that talk. So if people are thinking about crowdfunding, I've run several and there's got the same kind of building blocks. So that information is in there. And just to answer that question about where are you going to find your evidence of need, handy thing is that councils do a lot of this work and they find all this stuff out and they make documents. So wherever you're working, I can't remember who it was that was asking about that, find your council's strategic plan. If you're in an area that's quite a big urban area, there might be specific. So in Glasgow, it's community planning partnerships, and each community planning partnership will produce a document about the needs in that area. So that's where you want to go first, is find what documents your council has produced about the residents in your area. That's a really good place to go. And also then you can say, what's the evidence of need? Well, and you name drop the report and you say, so I will say Glasgow City Council's community planning partnership strategic objectives for 2021 to 2025 show that there is a need for services for young people. Like that's the stuff you want to like kind of drop those names in and do that. And a lot of that evidence of need you can share. So if there's organizations here that have got, found those stats and can share that information within the group, that's really useful, because the national level stuff is national level stuff. It applies to everyone. And so part of this is in the slides that you'll get that I had to skip over as to like, what are those different levels? But yeah, council documents is your first place to go. And so what's kind of coming across from all of the groups is it's the usual challenges. These are like, in some ways like I want you to know that it's not just you, and I want you to be reassured by the fact that these are challenges that everyone faces. And I've worked in like big, millions of pounds of turnover, huge organizations, is the same challenges. It's finding the funders that you've got the time to apply for, getting your applications in time, and figuring out who actually wants to fund what you want to do. And it's not a thing that you sort of do once. I would recommend setting time aside every quarter. So every 3 months, try and make a half day where you're just focusing on the funding, and you go and you look for what the opportunities are and you work on your project plans and you try and get some applications out the door. Because firefighting and doing it in a panic and doing it at the last minute, it's not a great way to exist. It's not sustainable in the sense of energy and motivation. But these things like share information with each other. You've got a great group here. Any fund that anyone finds, find a way to fire that around. And it's better to hear about a fund 5 times than miss something. And you'll soon build up that list and that awareness of who it is that you're going to go to. So share information with each other, and share stats that you've got, share case studies, share those reports that strengthen the applications, because everyone can use those and you can reuse them. So once you've invested a bit of time in making your evidence of need statement really strong, you copy and paste that thing for like 3 years before you need to redo it again. It's not about creating these huge amounts of work for you to do. Letters of support, testimonials and surveys are all ways to show there's a clear demand for your project idea. Absolutely. And you want to be just getting people to tell you, getting people in different sorts of jobs to tell you. So you can be like, a teacher said this, a policeman said this, a parent said this, using all those sources so that you're pointing lots of signs at yourself, being like, this is needed, this is awesome, this has impact. Definitely check out all the funds that I've sent through. Share information with each other. It can be worrying when you start seeing things like, there were 2,000 people tried to get onto the Investing in Communities fund. webinar, and there were 600 people on the Dumfries and Galloway community health and wellbeing one that I couldn't get on. Like, those funds are going to be hugely oversubscribed. The amount of people who actually hit the deadline, it's going to be smaller. The amount of people who hit the deadline with a good application, smaller again. So it's always worth going for them, but don't rely on them. Make those kind of the ones that are going to be really oversubscribed, make it one of your 5. So you might be like, okay, I'm going to give investing in communities a shot, but I'm going to the same application, the same project, the same copy. I'm going to also go to Bank of Scotland, and I'm going to go to People's Postcode Lottery, and I'm going to go to Awards for All, and I'm going to find a We Trust that only funds things in Perth, and I'm in Perth, and I'm going to ask them all for the money for the same thing. And something that people often go, so, oh, well, if I do 5 all for the same thing, what happens if I get all of them? You're asking each of them for half. So if you've got a 40 grand project, you ask Investing in Communities for 20, and Bank of Scotland for 20, and People's Postcode for 20, and Awards for All for 10, and someone else for 5, because chances are only 1 or 2 of those are going to come in. If they all come in and you end up with 200 grand for your project, that's not a problem. You will come up with ways to spend that money. If you get too much money, you do more. You run the thing for longer, you run it in more locations. So don't only give yourself like one shot at getting the money and going, well, I've asked that one funder, because statistically speaking, you need 5 asks to get 1 yes. So make all 5 the same thing and worry about having too much money when that's your problem, instead of, well, your problem is, oh my God, where are we getting money from? And so it's just another thing that people kind of trip themselves up with. But keep bearing in mind that kind of communication internally in your teams, communication with each other, and sharing the information that you've got, and building partnerships and going in for funds together. Remember your tenacity of, you're going to get turned down maybe 4 times before you get a yes. So, submit 5, keep asking, ask lots of people for the same thing. And don't do fundraising for 8 hours a day. I can't. I have to go and do other things. It is a creative process. It uses juice in your brain. It uses the good stuff. And when you are tired of paperwork, because you will get tired of the paperwork, reconnect to that passion. Go and work on your evidence of need. Go and pull your photos together and your testimonials and your quotes of people being like, this helped me. This made my life better. Go look at some smiling faces, because that's that passion and that vision of what is that you want to achieve is what's driving you. So make sure you have time to connect to that in between filling out risk assessments and budget forms and wanting to dig your own eyes out with a spoon. There's only a few weirdos like me who really enjoy that stuff. So don't beat yourself up for not enjoying it. Make yourself cups of tea, have breaks, like eat biscuits, as many jammy dodgers as you need to make it through, and get those applications in, because the work that you're trying to build and what you're trying to put into your communities at the end of the day is what's worth it. And I know that without knowing very much about any of you, is that what you're trying to do is worth it. Good luck. There we go. That's my closing comments.
Thank you so much, Phyllis, for your presentation today, and you've given everyone a lot of information, lots of very useful kind of tips. So yeah, thank you. Thanks again, Phyllis, for speaking today, and thanks everyone for coming. We hope you enjoyed it.